What's up, everybody? My name is Joe Brown, and this is Heresy Financial. I'm sure most of you have already seen this, but one of the crazier things that is included in the current infrastructure bill is a provision that would tax driving at 8 cents per mile. Now, this might not seem like a lot, but if you drive an average of 15,000 miles a year, that's going to cost you $1,200 every year just as a tax on your driving. All right, guys. Well, I really apologize for that right there. That was your daily dose of fake news. This was something that I saw. I think I saw a screenshot of it on Twitter, and it stood out to me as a really good example of what I'm talking about in this video, which is the dark side of modern monetary theory, MMT, and why taxes are used in MMT, what the purpose of them. And so this driving tax just stood out to me as a good example. And that was the last really I thought of it. And today, as I was editing this video, found out that's actually not what's going on. So in the infrastructure bill, really what's going on is they're introducing an idea to start this study on the driving tax to see if it would be a viable program to replace the gasoline tax. And so it's not a provision to straight up just start taxing miles. They want to start a study to see if that would be a good way to replace the gasoline tax for funding. And so I apologize. That's your daily dose of fake news there, but it doesn't really have much to do with the point of the video, which is why taxes are used under the framework of modern monetary theory. So sorry about that, and enjoy the video. Now, it might seem a little bit odd that they're including things like this to try and pretend like they're actually funding all the trillions of dollars through tiny little taxes like this that make no difference on the total, but they do make a difference for the average person and their paychecks. And the reason why I say it might seem odd is because modern monetary theory, which we're getting closer and closer to just fully implementing with monetary and fiscal policy, states emphatically that you do not need taxes in order to pay for spending. The question, how are we going to pay for it, should never be asked by policymakers because a country that controls its own currency can always fund by printing. And so in this video, we are going to talk about why it is not surprising at all to see taxes like this pop up, because the purpose is not to fund the trillions of dollars worth of spending. They have a different purpose, which highlights the dark side of MMT. Ready? Let's dive in. If you want the best resource about modern monetary theory, I recommend going straight to the source. Read The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton. I've got it linked in the description below. But be warned, if you don't know a lot about economics already, you're likely to find the book very persuasive because she presents it very well and uses a lot of sleight of hand, a lot of clever, deceptive tricks in order to present her case. One of the examples is she conflates wealth and money. And so lots of little tricks like that. So just be warned, if you don't know a lot about economics already, you're likely to find the arguments pretty persuasive. So I mentioned this tax, 8 cents per mile, that would tax driving, and this looks like it is coming in kind of contradiction to the spending side of things from our government, because as we're looking at getting closer and closer to just full out MMT, it always makes the question come up, why have taxes when you can just print to fund everything? So MMT has 3 reasons for why taxes exist, which expose kind of the darker side of MMT. So here are the 3 reasons. Number 1, reduce inequality. Number 2, enforce the use of the currency. And number 3, to incentivize or disincentivize behavior. Now, on the surface, these all sound fine, right? It sounds like kind of standard economics, but each of these exposes the dark side to MMT. So let's dive into the first one. First, reducing inequality. Remember, taxes under MMT are not necessary. It's the core principle. Taxes are not necessary to fund spending. And so when you look at battling inequality, inequality is the definition of that is you've got some people who are very rich and some people who are very poor, right? And so there's inequality there. So the way that MMT suggests combating that inequality is not by printing a bunch of money and handing it to the poor in order to raise their wealth so that the disparity in wealth comes down and that inequality is reduced. No, the suggestion is tax the rich, when you don't need those taxes in order to fund any spending. And so those taxes by definition are not necessary. The only purpose of taxing the rich is to reduce inequality, which is unnecessary if you can print money to give it to the poor. All right, so the second one is to enforce the use of the currency, and this one is equally as insidious. In the book, Stephanie Kelton gives an example of a parent who wants their kid to do chores. And so the parent decides to print out a bunch of fake money, and they say to their kids, hey, at the end of the week, if you've done your chores, I will pay you money. Well, clearly, this doesn't do anything because the money that they're paying has no real world value. It's just made up, it's just printed, so the kids don't do their chores. So the parent gets a better idea. The next week, they tell their kids, hey, if you do these chores, I will pay you a certain amount of money for each chore, and at the end of the week, you owe me X amount of these fake dollars back. And if you don't give me these dollars back, you're going to get grounded or you're going to have a punishment. Well, suddenly, this fake money has intrinsic value. The kids have to come up with that money somehow, and the only source they can get it from is the parent. They can't go get it from somewhere else. They can't make it themselves. They have to get the parent's money by doing chores in order to just give it back at the end of the week. And at the end of the week, the parent can decide to do whatever they want with it. It has no use for the parent because the parent can just make as many of it as they want. This is exactly what is going on with taxes. The government through the central bank can print as much money as they want. They do not need to collect money in taxes, but it enforces the use of that currency because people have to accumulate a certain amount of that currency in order to just hand it back to the government, and the government just destroys it when they get it back. It's not necessary for funding. And so it exposes the intrinsic uselessness of the currency without the government's monopoly on violence and enforcing its use through the imprisonment of people who do not use it, accumulate it, pay it back as taxes, even though it's completely unnecessary. It's not useful for the government. They only do it in order to make sure people still use their worthless currency. And the third reason for taxes under the framework of MMT is to incentivize or disincentivize certain behaviors. So one way this can look is to fight inflation in isolated areas. So let's say you have prices of used cars, let's say, skyrocketing, right? Well, MMT would suggest that what you do in order to combat that is to add massive taxes onto cars, because that theoretically would disincentivize the purchase of cars enough to slow down the purchases to bring those prices back down. It would suppress that area of the economy. Now, the problem with this is that you don't always know the cause of why prices are going up. And it may be that adding taxes to used cars doesn't slow down the purchasing of used cars and only incurs a more heavy burden on the people that must buy those used cars anyway. Maybe those used car prices are going up because of, I don't know, supply chain issues and those semiconductors and computer chips not being able to get shipped and put into new cars. And so the total supply of cars is not growing as fast as it used to, or might even be shrinking because some cars are getting used up through accidents and things like that. And so it might be that adding a tax on an area where prices are skyrocketing does nothing to impede the prices rising, but just lays a heavier burden on the demand that must necessarily be there anyway. And if you have inflation system-wide because there's been too much money and prices everywhere are heating up, so you try and withdraw money in order to suck money out of the economy to reduce the amount of money that's in circulation to pull prices back down, you might overdo that, just like you overdid the printing of money, and trigger a deflationary death spiral. You know, these fine-tuning levers in this command and control economy works really great, doesn't it? Just look at China. But inflation and deflation are not the only areas where MMT suggests incentivizing and disincentivizing behavior through the use of taxes. Just look at something like this driving tax, 8 cents per mile. There's no inequality that's being combated right here. There's no increase into the value of the dollar by this tax, because people already need to accumulate dollars to send them to Uncle Sam for taxes. So it doesn't do anything for the second reason. And then the third reason, incentivizing and disincentivizing behavior, has nothing to do with inflation or deflation, because driving is just an activity. I mean, we already have taxes on gas. We have sales taxes on the cars. So driving as an activity has has nothing to do with inflation or deflation. So why would you see a tax like this pop up? Well, it comes down to incentivizing or disincentivizing behavior that the government believes is good for the economy. And it is very clear that this administration believes that affecting climate change is good for the country. So a heavy enough driving tax would, in theory, disincentivize driving. Now again, this has no economic effect other than taking money away from people who have to drive or choose to drive anyway, and then potentially reducing the amount of driving that takes place. And this is one of the core principles that Stephanie Kelton talks about in her book, The Deficit Myth, is that using the MMT framework allows governments to target specific areas, to target things that they believe is good for the country, good for the people, good for the society, good for the economy. Because it's clear, has nothing to do with revenue, because it's a very small drop in the bucket compared to what they're actually going to be spending, so it doesn't help out with the funding of it. This has nothing to do with reducing inequality. It's also clear this has nothing to do with inflation or deflation. This is simply targeting for agenda-driven purposes that the government or whichever party is in power believes is good for the country. And the most dangerous part about this is the answer to the question, what if you're wrong? What if you're wrong about whether that is a good thing for the economy or bad thing for the economy? Because you've just enforced this system-wide. You didn't allow it to be tested out by individual actors. You're imposing systemic risk. And so that's why seeing taxes like this pop up are not at all at odds with the framework that we're moving closer and closer to, full-blown modern monetary theory, even though you don't need those small taxes in order to fund your crazy spending. You use those small taxes for a number of things that have that dark side behind them. As always, really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.